where our motion is cutting the Pentagon's budget is a gift to our enemies. We have two teams of two arguing over this motion, and now we move on to round two. Two teams of two arguing this motion, cutting the Pentagon's budget is a gift to our enemies. The team arguing for the motion, Andrew Krepinevich and Tom Donnelly, have argued that budget cuts threaten to make a dangerous world even more dangerous, that a weaker U.S. military would encourage our adversaries and create for us a hollow military. They say that the peace and security that comes in 3 cents of the dollar is a bargain, considering what a peaceful world it has led to for so long in terms of wars among the great powers, that this is a dangerous world and we have to take our enemies seriously in their perception of this as a weakness on our part. The team arguing against the motion, Schake and Ben Friedman, say that the threat at this point is exaggerated. Number one, we are so dominant militarily. We have oceans protecting us, a technological advantage, and a dominance that makes it just too early to worry about a real threat to our existence. They say that that their opponents are actually arguing for a global domination that is unnecessary to ensure the common defense, and they also point out that the cost of the military itself actually represents the real threat to our national security. I want to ask the team that's arguing for this motion, the team that is arguing that the cuts are a threat to our security and a gift to our enemies, to put to you the point that your opponent, Ben Friedman, has made, that your argument for a strong military, a military that does not have to suffer these budget cuts, is premised on a goal of global domination. He says that's really what your vision is. Is that accurate? Do you cop to that, Tom Donnelly?
Well, I like to do the crime before I do the time. So, no, I don't, dominance is a loaded term, no question.
That's why he used it.
Yeah, no. I noted that. But I'll cop to it. It doesn't bother me if America is stronger than everybody else times 2 or 3. America's role in the world, from my perspective, has been pretty positive. And the use of American military power has made a better world. And so I'd rather be dominant than weak.
Andrew, let me come back to you because I'd like to just hear from the other side on that. Ben, it was your point. Can you respond to Tom's?
Well, obviously that's a false dichotomy. My whole point is that we're incredibly strong now vis-a-vis our enemies, so weakness is not something that's on the table in this debate. The argument is they say we need to try to have 10 times the power of our enemies and basically guide history to be safe, and that's a massive over-definition of our safety. The United States is incredibly safe for natural geographic reasons because of our economy, and most of what we're doing in the name of safety or defense is sort of a luxury that most states don't endeavor to do. And I think it gets us into trouble that we could avoid. A few difference of percentage points in the defense budget is not going to make a difference. But if we really rethought our strategy, we could be a lot safer because we'd avoid conflicts that we get into.
All right, we'll get on to that in a bit. I want to let Andrew Krepinevich respond.
Ben was kind enough to cite my Foreign Affairs article. In the article, even absent the sequestration cuts, I said we're going to have to really trim our sails. We're not going to be able to fight or deal with threats in 2 different regions, even though there are 3 regions in the world we consider to be vital interests. We're not, maybe you think this is a good thing, we're not going to be able to threaten anybody with regime change. I think we're going to struggle just to maintain access to critical regions where we have trading partners and resource requirements. We haven't figured out a way to deter cyber attacks, and the cyber threat is growing. We haven't figured out a way to protect our assets in space. And I think the next big thing coming down the road is the undersea infrastructure, which is huge, and with the spread of robotics increasingly accessible even to non-state groups who can threaten the enormous energy infrastructure that in military parlance is comprised mostly of soft targets.
Let me bring that to Schake. The money argument, it sounds like everything that was just outlined is important and would cost a lot.
Well, we don't have to do things in the future the way we have done them in the past. And I think one of the important advantages of the American military is actually its adaptability and its innovation. Our biggest advantage isn't our spending, it's the creativity and build a better mousetrap.
But are you saying that, therefore, is your point really that the U.S. military could do a lot more with a lot less, a lot more? I think both sides agree, and I don't think there's much debate to Corey's point that there's waste and there could be more efficiency. I think they
But we
agree
can
with
also
that.
do it differently. We can drive innovation so that our enemies' advantages get matched up better against. One of the challenges that we have in the current defense budget is that the force structure doesn't match the strategy, as both our colleagues across the aisle have
Yeah, we
pointed
could make
out.
more choices, and I think at least one of our opponents would agree that if we cut the ground forces a lot, we could afford to do lots of things with the Navy with a smaller budget than we have now.
Well, the problem,
Andrew Krepinevich, go ahead.
The problem is right now that efficiencies is everybody's favorite solution. We have efficiencies, magic happens, and all of a sudden we save all this money.
Well, I'm talking about choices.
We've been going to that movie for about 50 years now, and the result is always the same. We put the cart before the horse. Let Congress and the political leadership take on the responsibility, exercise the moral courage to make these changes before we saddle our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines with the problem. I was talking to one, in fact, it was Secretary Panetta, and if you know him, you know he's very fond of colorful language, and I raised the issue of efficiencies, and he said that's a bunch of baloney, although he didn't use the word baloney.
Yeah, this is a radio show, so I'm glad you censored.
And for those who say, well, we spend more than others, well, as I mentioned earlier, we have a volunteer military. What kind of military do you think we have if we paid our soldiers, airmen, sailors, and Marines what the Pakistanis pay theirs, or what the Russians pay theirs, or what the Chinese pays theirs? As Tom said, do you want to wait till the enemy is at your shores and then start figuring out how to deal with the threat?
All right,
Or
let
do you
me
want to
let me
work with
let me
allies
put that
to keep
very
them at a
question to the
distance?
other side.
lot
Do you
of-
want to wait till the enemy is at your shores and
We
then
get a lot
deal with
of straw men coming out
Friedman.
now. Fight them over here, fight them. I'm saying don't fight them. Let's have fewer wars. But I think you guys both just signed a letter saying we should reform compensation for personnel. So we're not going to pay them like Pakistan or Russia. We're going to pay them well. We're going to pay them above what they would get in a regular market, I think, with those reforms. And I'm for that, too. That's an efficiency. So there are some a BRAC, we're doing all the same stuff with fewer bases. That's an efficiency. So I'm not a big efficiency guy. I basically agree with Panetta. But that's why I said, why don't we cut the size of the Army, which I think you might agree with. If we're not going to occupy a country, we can have a smaller ground force. That's not an efficiency. That's a strategic choice. That's what I'm talking about, more strategic choices.
Tom Donnelly, is it accurate what Ben Friedman just said, that you also want to cut the size of the Army?
I think Ben laid it out very well.
Okay, because I want to know
It's not
what...
an efficiency. It's a choice to have less power and to withdraw.
All right.
Can I take,
Landed that
yeah,
very well.
can I
Is
take
it
that on?
an issue of having less power? Is it okay to be less powerful, Corey Schake?
I'm not in favor of that, as a matter of fact. I agree with Tom on that, but it seems to me that maintaining American power in the international order is more affordable than our colleagues across the aisle suggest it is. And let me just give you one example.
Isn't it more a matter of style? I believe your opponents are talking about not really wanting to do away with a lot of carrier groups. Am I right about that? You want the aircraft carriers there. You want them deployed around the world. You want them near other people's shores. You want troops stationed in NATO ally countries and in South Korea. Am I right about all that?
Again, Corey, I think hit on a good point, which is we're going to need to. We're going to need not to do more of the same. We're going to need to begin to think about things differently. As Robert Rosencrantz mentioned, the problem set is becoming quite a bit different than Afghanistan and Iraq. The problem is, as I mentioned before, that when you've got a shrinking budget and exploding personnel costs, what gets squeezed out are science and technology, research and development of new capabilities, training and exercises to test out these capabilities to find out what works and what doesn't. And so you're stuck making a big bet and you hope it'll work, but you really don't have the chance to test it out.
Andrew, let me give the
wasting
floor
things
back
or
to
not.
Corey, because I took it away from her and then you took it away from me. So, well done. But it's not going to happen again.
Let me just, I basically agree with what Andy just said, but the point is that, for example, take the Army, right? You don't have to make one big bet by cutting the size of the Army. The size of the Army in the 1990s, before September 11th, was 490,000 soldiers. That was when you still had the planning construct that said we had to be able to fight two nearly simultaneous wars. It was before you had the revolution in communications and precision and battlefield awareness that has made American forces so much more effective than they were. It was before the defense guidance, which Secretary Panetta brought into being in the Pentagon that said that we are not going to size our force to fight a large, sustained land war anymore. And yet, the size the Army says it needs is 490,000, the exact same as in 1990. The threats are different, the requirements are different, we need to find new ways to do stuff. The answer shouldn't be the exact same as it was in the 1990s.
Tom Donnelly and then Ben Friedman. Tom Donnelly.
Well, this is extraordinarily reminiscent. I mean, this is the kind of talk we heard out of Donald Rumsfeld before 9/11. 490,000 was too small. We proved that by being unable to do Iraq and Afghanistan properly at the same time. So I don't think that was a good experience. And I don't want to expect that the world is going to be technologically transformed and that the art of war is going to be fundamentally different than it's ever been in human history. That seems like a bit of a long shot to me, too. Numbers matter, and we have just proved that in spades over the last decade.
Meaning what? You need a lot of boots on the ground. Is that what you're saying?
There are some things that you cannot do with technology. And we have actually fought irregular wars and counterinsurgencies in the most technologically sophisticated way ever. But I don't think the result was satisfactory.
Ben Friedman.
Again, I hear arguments being made for me that I don't make. I am not signing up for Don Rumsfeld's vision of anything in my argument. Occasionally we might agree on something, but my argument is not his. He liked war a lot more than I do, and we're hearing a lot of assumptions about the changes that will be made if we, or what will happen if we cut the defense budget is personnel will get squeezed and we'll cut the O&M budget so we'll have a hollow force. If we did that, it would be a mistake. So we don't endorse things that will lead to a hollow force. The military of the 70s, I'll grant, was a bit of a hollow force. The personnel situation was bad. That's because we didn't pay them enough. Compensation is much better now by a mile. We are making choices now to avoid cutting the O&M budget at the expense of procurement. So we can avoid that, and our argument doesn't entail doing all the bad things you say it does. And finally, I think since you asked, power is our capacity to generate force. It's potential. It's not standing military forces. There are powerful nations that have quite small militaries. The difference is with weak nations is they could change that if they wanted to. So our long-term economic health, of course, is essential to our power.
Question for this side, unless you want to respond, because I wanted to move along slightly, but go ahead if you do want to respond.
Andrew
Krepinevich.
I would just like to say that we are only at the dawn of sequestration. And all you have to do is read the papers. The Air Force is cutting back on training. The Army's cutting back on training. The Air Force can't replace its aging aircraft, in part because we screwed up over the last decade or so in terms of the procurement approach. But again, that's poor excuse for compromising our security and punishing our service members. Were mistakes made? Certainly they were. Does that mean we give up on our security because we didn't get it right, or does that mean we ignore what's going on now?
All right. Do you want to respond, Ben?
Well, let me just say, the sequestration, we had one kind of sequestration in fiscal year 2013, which said no matter what happens with the budget, we cut across the board, we cut everything equally. And that wasn't quite as severe as the services made it out to be, but it was dumb, and I'm against it. We're against it. But going forward, what we have are budget caps, and if they get under the cap, they can do whatever they want. So they don't have to do all those foolish things with cutting back on training in 14, 15, 16, 17, as long as they get under the cap. They can make choices. So sequestration in 13 was dumb. Going forward, as long as they get under the cap, it's okay.
Andrew.
But then we still have the personnel problem, and part of the Budget Control Act, the President was given the option of exempting personnel costs and personnel cuts. And so again, you have that situation where you have this personnel budget that is crowding out everything else.
But benefits are being cut.
I'm sorry?
Benefits are being cut?
Benefits, the proposal right now is to scale back on some of the health care benefits and so on, but what the President can do is exempt as Ben was saying, what you have is what the Pentagon calls a haircut. Everything gets cut. And I think one thing we all agree on is this is a foolish way to run things.
What I'm trying to figure out is what you all disagree on. Because I know you do. I know you do, and I think it goes to this issue of what are our enemies thinking? And all of you in your opening statement say, I don't want to read my enemy's mind because it's unpleasant to be in there. But I think we want to talk about the notion, and this was alluded to by you, Tom, in your opening statement, that this is a weaker U.S. military is a temptation, not just for China, but for who knows, to do things that right now they're just not going to bother doing. It's also some freedom for our allies to not be militarized and to dampen down those ambitions. So what about that whole point of our enemies' perception of us being not dominant? Tom Donnelly.
I think as Andy says, if you read the newspapers or listen to NPR or whatever.
Tom, I just want to, for the radio, to ask you to stay, if you just look toward the mic. Okay. Thanks.
Again, when I read the newspapers in the morning or read the news online or however I got my news, what I see is people feeling for openings and weak spots. We see that very much in Syria and Iraq. The war has spread to western Iraq, northern Jordan, et cetera, et cetera. We see that in the Pacific, in the South China Sea, where the Chinese, even without an aircraft carrier, are nudging and pushing at what Ben calls the various rocks in the South China Sea, but things that really matter to our allies. People are our treaty allies, like the Filipinos. I don't want there to be a war over a rock in the South China Sea. And what we see is people feeling for how far they can go in the absence of American military presence.
Okay, let me take that to the other side. Very specifically stated that the perception that our commitment to strong defense may be wavering is already resulting in people putting out feelers to see what they can get away with. Sounds very logical. I want to put that to Kori Schake.
Disagree.
Why? Kori Schake.
Because enemies always probe for your weaknesses. That's what enemies do. The Iranians aren't newly racing for a nuclear weapon. They've been doing it since before we started cutting defense spending. The Chinese have been rising since before.
But the logic of that is that they're going to race even faster if they think that if our resolve is wavering.
Enemies don't play to your strong suit, right? Nobody's going to fight the American army in an open space tank battle because they're going to lose. What enemies try and do is play to your weaknesses. That's why they go for terrorism.
That's what these guys are saying.
That's why they go for cyber. Whether we have 8 carrier battle groups or 9, I actually don't think is going to make that much difference to the Chinese calculation about whether they want a Chinese dream that is their dominance of the Pacific. We need a comprehensive sense of our strength, and right now we are stronger in our military capabilities than we are in our trade agreements, than we are in our diplomacy, than we are in our development. We ought to hedge up what our actual weaknesses are, not continue to reinforce our strength.
Andrew Krepinevich.
We are being confronted by some strategic choices, to use Ben's term. There are 3 regions of the world that we rely on for trade and for resources. We're part of the global economy. And we rely on the global commons, space, cyberspace, the sea, and the undersea to link us to those parts of the world. In the Far East, the Chinese, for over a decade now, have been building up their military capabilities to try and push us out of the region. Just listen to what the Japanese, the Taiwanese, the Koreans, and so on are saying. We have a strategic choice. Now, it's not going to be a big army that we respond with, but we're going to have to do something to maintain stability in that region, lest we encourage Chinese adventurism. And you could see it in the paper in terms of the trends in Chinese behavior. Iran, a nuclear-armed Iran. Do you think they're more or less likely to support Hezbollah or to support Assad in Syria or to try and undermine the Gulf monarchies and disrupt the flow of energy? Pakistan, again, I don't want to go on at length, but you look at the cyber situation. Concerns that even non-state entities will be able to inflict serious damage on us through cyber attacks.
Andrew, let me let Ben Friedman respond.
Well, I mean, contrary to how it appears in Washington, D.C., the world actually doesn't revolve around Washington, D.C. So what China does vis-a-vis its territorial claims, this is shocking, it's not completely driven by conversations in Washington or small differences in our defense spending from year to year. What Iran does in terms of disrupting energy flows or funding Hezbollah is not driven by small differences in the U.S. defense budget. They might have some minor preference, but it really doesn't matter. They're going to do what they're going to do for other reasons than a margin of difference in our defense spending. If there's been an indication that the United States is not as up for war as it was a while ago, it wasn't because we're spending spending a little less on the military, it's because we had bad wars that made the public less enthusiastic to go, which is a good thing. And maybe it cut back a little credibility, but if you want lots of credibility to have wars, then don't have dumb ones all the time, you know? Save it for the good times. So I'll leave it there.
You guys want to pick up Tom Donnelly?
Well, I would just say that
Andrew
let's just
Krepinevich.
take the Far East example. The purpose of trying to maintain a stable military balance in the region and address the capabilities that the Chinese are building up, the purpose is to avoid war, not to fight war. You can get into a war because of the perception that you're too weak to defend yourselves or that you're irresolute. And cutting $1 trillion additionally out of defense over the next decade certainly, I think, sends that message as we withdraw from parts of the world.
Yeah, I just want to put to this, I mean, history, 20th century has got some great examples of weakness being perceived as an opportunity for aggression. That's the point the other side just made. Again, there's a logic to it, and there's historical precedent for it. It's not a ridiculous claim. So can you respond to that, Schake?
It's a very strong claim. I agree with it. But it hinges on the belief that we are close to the margin at which another military believes they could defeat the United States militarily.
But the logic of what you're saying is that they only don't because we're so dominant. So you're saying they won't mess with us because we're so dominant, therefore we don't have to be so dominant anymore.
Well, I'm saying it's a really wide margin. We're not close to the line
Okay.
at which China thinks they can fight the American Navy.
So what
and
you're
win
saying
that
is we
war.
could afford to be a lot less dominant and we would still be pretty darn dominant.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Quit going to
Okay,
Thank you for saying it better than I did.
Let me take it to that point to the other side, that we have a lot of wiggle room, is what your
Well-
opponents are saying. Tom Donnelly.
One of the things that technology has yet to solve is how to be in two places at once. As advanced as our military is, if it's not there, it's not there. And what we see in the world now is the effect of us not being there. China doesn't want to go to war with us. They probably want to go to war with us even less than we could ever possibly want to go to war with them. They want the benefits of nibbling away, pushing the limits. They want to intimidate the Filipinos and the Taiwanese. They don't want to mess with us. But if we're not there, there are going to be consequences. And you see it every day.